Hype. It's a completely natural thing for a fictional character to garner, whether it be because they're in an interesting romance, or they have incredible battle skills, or they give fantastic speeches. Hype will always revolve around our favorite characters. And there's nothing wrong with generating hype. In fact, generating hype is how certain anime and manga stay alive. You need to have compelling characters that people stick to because they have incredibly hype moments. If you don't, you just have a bland story nobody wants to read. However, there are some characters out there that may or may not deserve the hype they get. And these characters we would call overhyped. Characters who have incredibly brief stints in the anime or the manga and somehow become fan favorites. Most likely because during these brief stints, these characters are introduced as incredibly powerful people. And while there's nothing wrong with enjoying these characters who aren't on screen for long, the real problems arise when these characters begin to get overhyped. But what's worse is when a character becomes overhyped, even when they're on screen, almost constantly. See, a lack of screen time isn't the only reason that some characters get overhyped. Sometimes it's just in the very nature of a character to get overhyped. So whether or not you're in one episode or 500, there's always the chance. And the Naruto universe is no exception to this rule. In fact, the Naruto universe might be a standout in this category, which is why today we're going to be talking about the most overhyped characters in Naruto and why they're overhyped. Before we get to talking about any levels of hype, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you love the idea of me talking about overhyped anime characters, you're gonna love my other channel, The Weeb Commander, where I talk about all other anime outside of Naruto and Boruto. And if you just love the idea of me talking about anime characters, you're gonna love my anime podcast, Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. By the way, I am fully aware that I look and sound like the bottom of a composting pile. I've been moving for 3 days. I had to visit my family for a week. Anime Expo was 2 days before that, and I can't remember the last time I slept. I spit up something this morning that I'm not entirely sure was biological, and the only thing on my mind currently is sleep. But look! New office. You know the real overhyped character? Rest. Back to business. Hype. It's one of the most important things in making sure that your story becomes one that is read. And whether that come from battles, speeches, romances, or the characters themselves, as long as hype is being generated, you're moving in the right direction. And the massive catalog of incredibly hype moments in Naruto and incredibly hype characters is what made it the #1 anime on Earth. And therefore, even though we are going to be talking about some overhyped characters, at the same time, we have to be thankful for these overhyped characters. As without characters like this, Naruto wouldn't be nearly as popular as it is. And without Naruto being as big as it is, I wouldn't have just moved into a house where I have not one, but 2 offices. But you're gonna have to watch Otaku's Anonymous to see the other office. Now, with a list such as this, obviously, it's gonna be heavily subjective. There's gonna be characters on this list that I believe to be overhyped that you may be the people hyping, but I'm gonna try to provide logical and sound arguments for why these characters probably garner more hype than they deserve. But I'd like to get a couple of characters who won't be making this list out of the way. See, when you look up things like Naruto's most overrated characters, you'll find names like Itachi and Kabuto and Madara on the list. Characters who are incredibly powerful at their peaks, but also have a speculative higher ceiling, and therefore people will wonder what these characters could have accomplished in the right circumstances. And thus, my honorable mentions for this list will be the 3 names I just listed, starting with Kabuto. See, when you ask somebody who's the most overhyped character in Naruto, a lot of them will answer with Kabuto. And quite frankly, I just don't think that's accurate. See, Kabuto is a perplexing character. He's also present in the majority of the story. All the way from the Forest of Death to the 4th Great Shinobi World War, Kabuto is heavily involved. And through the entire time that Kabuto was involved, through different means, he keeps himself incredibly relevant. See, in the early days of Kabuto's life, we know that he was an orphan who got recruited into the route by Danza. And then after entering the route, he met Orochimaru, who scuttled off with him, which is how Kabuto ended up as a hidden sound shinobi at the Forest of Death, which is why Kabuto was such a problem in the Forest of Death, and even after in the search for Tsunade arc. From an early age, Kabuto had not only been trained in medical ninjutsu by his adoptive mother, Yakushi, but he then got recruited into the Root, where he learned espionage and assassination skills from Danzo. And then he got recruited by Orochimaru, where he even further advanced his medical ninjutsu knowledge. Meaning, by the time that the Forest of Death and the search for Tsunade arc rolled around, he was one of the more intimidating characters in Naruto, being comparatively powerful to Orochimaru. Kabuto remains relevant by being a double agent for sorcery, and eventually becomes a little bit more than relevant after he undergoes a ton of medical experiments on himself in order to give himself a myriad of new powers. The first of which being grafting Orochimaru's great white snake flesh onto his body and essentially Orochimarifying himself, giving him the ability to control the great white snake, a massive regeneration factor, and access to Orochimaru's Senjutsu chakra prowess, making Kabuto a self-proclaimed dragon sage, as he believed he had evolved beyond the scope of a snake sage. However, because Kabuto had become a snake sage by incurring the bite of the great white snake sage and living, he was able to do things like breathe chakra into inanimate objects and make them into elemental golems, as well as obviously enter some semblance of a snake sage mode. But this isn't where Kabuto's medical experimentations on himself ended, as Kabuto also took the Kekkei Genkai of all of the Sound Village 5, Kitamaru's webs, Kimimaro bone production, Sakon's body merging ability, strange transmission, distant shadow, and he technically didn't even stop there, as Kabuto also took all of the abilities of the members of Hebi or Taka, taking Suigetsu's hydrification ability, Jugo's ability to naturally pull in Senjutsu chakra, and Karin's massive chakra pool, which he used to be able to heal himself from injuries. For all intents and purposes, he was an amalgamation of everything Orochimaru ever touched. And while in premise that sounds like the ultimate ninja, the reason that people believe that Kabuto is, in fact, overhyped is because he loses to Itachi and Sasuke, who technically weren't trying to kill him. See, when Sasuke and Itachi came into combat against Kabuto, they couldn't kill him, because if they did, those who were brought back using Edo Tensei would never be released. And thus, instead of killing him, they had to force Kabuto into releasing Edo Tensei. And therefore, since this ultimate version of Kabuto, the Dragon Sage, was defeated, even with the caveat that they can't kill him in place, people believe that this version of Kabuto is overhyped. And quite honestly, I couldn't agree less. See, here's the thing. Obviously, Kabuto does lose, and obviously Itachi and Sasuke weren't trying to kill him, but that doesn't mean a whole lot when you consider the fact that he was fighting Sasuke and Itachi, two characters who they themselves have caught allegations of being overhyped. And not to mention, this was Edo Tensei Itachi, which a lot of people hypothesize to be the strongest iteration of Itachi we've ever seen. And sure, Kabuto loses to Itachi, but this version of Itachi had to sacrifice one of his eyes to defeat him. Now you can say that that was his only option because obviously Kabuto had somewhat of an immunity to Genjutsu, but the fact that he forced the strongest version of Itachi ever, one of the strongest characters in the show, as he was fighting side by side with dual MS Sasuke. Oh no, I'm sorry, dual EMS Sasuke, proves that Kabuto might be a little stronger than we're giving him credit for. But since we're talking about Itachi, let's talk about Itachi, another person that a lot of people say is overhyped. And while I will admit Itachi fanboys do go a bit hard, a lot of Itachi's hype is warranted. Itachi doesn't fall into the archetype of the character who's described to be strong and then never really shows it like Kabuto, but instead the character who was supposed to fly higher than they even flew. And therefore, people will constantly speculate about how high he could have flown. See, Itachi, for the entire time he's in the show or the manga, is one of the most intimidating and powerful characters around, whether that be while he was alive or after he was brought back. While Itachi was alive, his resume was insane. He permanently injured Yagura, a perfect Jinchuriki. He put Kakashi in a coma. He, while trying simply to fight Sasuke long enough until Sasuke was exhausted enough for Orochimaru to take over his body, killed the strongest version of Orochimaru we saw in Naruto. And his feats when he came back were even more insane, as he was basically the sole reason that Killer Bee and KCM1 Naruto came out victorious against Edo Nagato, who reformed into his prime after absorbing some of Killer Bee's chakra. And then after after all of that, like we've already covered, went to put Kabuto in Izanami, releasing every Edo Tensei's soul back to the Pure Lands, except for Madara, because he knew the hand signs. It's so dumb. But people speculate that if Itachi didn't have his chakra sickness, he would have been the strongest Uchiha ever, beating back the likes of Obito and Madara and even his younger brother Sasuke. And here's the thing, technically we have no way of ever truly knowing. Like we've already stated, the strongest version of Itachi we ever saw was the Edo Tensei version, which wasn't affected by the chakra illness, or at least maybe was affected by the chakra illness, but his chakra illness just made sure he had a small chakra pool, but that chakra pool was constantly refilling. So in all the ways that matter, he wasn't being affected by said chakra illness. And when people try to say, well, this Edo Tensei version of Itachi probably couldn't have beaten Madara or Obito, you're right, but obviously Itachi's growth was substantially stunted by the fact that A, he never got an EMS, and B, chakra illness. And therefore, if he had been able to live as long and as healthily as Obito and Madara, saying that Obito lived healthily is kind of a stretch, he could have achieved much greater heights of power. Though I will admit saying that Itachi could beat the likes of Madara is a bit of a stretch. And if that's the camp that you fall into, then maybe you are overhyping Itachi. But who knows, if Itachi had taken Fugaku's MS and acquired an EMS and had grown up fully healthy, maybe he could have battled against the likes of Madara. We don't know. What we do know is with a severely crippled body, Itachi was able to become one of the strongest people in the universe. If he was able to hypothetically spam things like his Tsukiyomi or his Amaterasu 18 times like Kakashi in the War Arc, he would be a menace. And if he was able to create a winged version of Susanoo that was also able to wield the Totsuka Blade and the Yata Mirror, he would be nigh indestructible. Now, obviously, is there no way he would be able to touch 3 Rinnegan Madara? Probably not, because Madara had 3 Rinnegan, and one of them was a Rinne Sharingan, something that only one other person in history has awoken that we know of. Shibai might have had one. But since we're talking about Madara, let's talk about Madara. See, Madara falls into the same camp as Itachi, unfortunately. An incredibly powerful character whose ceiling we really feel like we never saw. See, nobody's ever doubted the strength of Madara. While he was alive, he battled against Hashirama, the second strongest Hokage of all time, for 20 or so years to a draw, till eventually he lost his brother and Tobirama could start getting up in the mix. Madara was the first ever person to tame Kurama, forcing him into a summoning contract, making the strongest tailed beast on Earth essentially his pet. He was also the first person to figure out things like majestic attire Susanoo, realizing he could put a Susanoo on more than just himself. He took a part of Hashirama's flesh and awoken the Rinnegan at the prime age of close to 70 or 80, and at that point still had enough chakra to summon the Gedomazo from the moon. And when he returned to the 4th Great Shinobi World War, even though his plan was incredibly flawed, he was able to enact the Eye of the Moon plan, acquiring both of his Rinnegan back and awakening the 3rd Rinnegan, the Rinne Sharingan, in his forehead that he could use to reflect infinite Tsukiyomi off the moon. Now, this version of Madara was light speed, could control Truth Seeker orbs, could create a Genjutsu that put the entire world under Genjutsu, had mouth lasers that moved at light speed, could shoot out Emperor Palpatine purple lightning out of his fingers. There was pretty much nothing he couldn't do, and there was nobody who appeared to have any chance of taking him out. That is, of course, until Plot came around, and Black Zetsu punched a hole in Madara's chest so he could become Kaguya in one of the least popular plot twists of all time. But Boruto needed a villain. You know what's wild? Kishimoto knew he was going to be stepping away from the Naruto universe to write Samurai 8 after the conclusion of Shippuden, but like obviously his editors were like, oh my god, Naruto's making so much money, we need more, let's make Boruto. And still sacrificed the end of Naruto for Boruto. And listen, Boruto's manga is very good, and obviously the Otsutsuki thread is what makes it very good, but he could have been like, all right, you guys figure it out in Boruto, I'm going to finish the story in the way that I want to. But nope, Kaguya. But because Madara got these incredible power-ups that made him seem nigh unkillable and then got killed by somebody who we didn't know of until, you know, he killed Madara, people hypothesized that there is nobody out there that could have beaten Madara in a fight. That the real reason that Madara was killed wasn't to make sure that there was a bad guy for Boruto, but because nobody could defeat Madara. And in a story as old as time, Kishimoto wrote a character too strong and had to find a way to kill them that wasn't, oh, I don't know, other people getting strong to kill them. And thus the speculations about how strong 3 Rinnegan Madara truly was never really cease, with people hypothesizing that he was more powerful than any of the Otsutsukis we've even met thus far, that he could be comparable to the likes of full-strength Hokage Naruto or full-strength Shadow Hokage Sasuke, that he could have mopped the floor with Kaguya, and so on and so forth. And once again, just like with Itachi, we straight up just don't know. Pretty much all Madara does after awakening his Rinne Sharingan is cast Infinite Tsukiyomi, and after he casts his Infinite Tsukiyomi, he just gets killed. Now, if you want to be death battle about all of this and speculate the amount of TNT force it would take to spread the roots of the world tree all across the world, you could speculate that Madara is a true planet buster or something like that. And you could use that as a quantifiable feat for his AP that puts him higher than any other Otsutsuki we've ever seen. But that's not really anything. In fact, it kind of flies in the face of everything we know about the God Tree. I think I called it the World Tree a second ago. Once again, tired. So how strong was Madara? Probably not as strong as Kaguya, just because of the way that plot progression works. The stronger enemy always shows up latest.
But Kaguya had to use a surprise feat.
No, she didn't. Kaguya's will had to use a surprise feat. And the fact that Black Zetsu had enough attack power to be able to donut hole Madara and switch him into kind of its mother should point us in the direction that maybe 3 Rinnegan Madara wasn't as strong as we thought. But once again, for the gajillionth time, we don't know. So sure, is it probably out of line to speculate that 3 Rinnegan Madara is stronger than Ishiki or Hokage Naruto? Yeah, but is it insane to speculate that he probably could have given Kaguya a pretty good run for her money combat-wise? No, he was most likely either the most powerful or the second most powerful character in Naruto, with whether or not you believe him being stronger or weaker than Kaguya being the only thing that oscillates him between 1 and 2. And if he was the strongest character in Naruto, that still makes him top 5, top 6 in Boruto. Speculating that 3 Rinnegan Madara would have been a problem for everybody currently in the Naruto universe is not a stretch. Maybe 6 past Jibaku Tensei wouldn't have worked on Madara. Maybe he did need to be wiped out for plot reasons. Say it with me now. We just don't know. And therefore, any hype garnered around one of the most powerful characters in the Naruto universe, I feel, is relatively warranted. But what about some characters who don't deserve the hype they get? Enough with the honorable mentions, let's get to the dishonorable mentions. Because coming up at number 5, we have something that's gonna catch me a whole lot of ire: Shikamaru.
What do you mean? Shikamaru's a genius. You give him prep time, he can beat anybody.
It's facts! It's facts!
That right there, and the people behind that line of logic, is why Shikamaru is on this list. Shikamaru's intelligence is undeniable. With an IQ over 200, Shikamaru is probably one of the smartest people in the Naruto universe. And therefore, when it comes to things like politicking or being the Hokage's aide, he's probably your best possible option for it. In fact, the Nara clan's incredible intelligence is why they're often either medicinal doctors or politicians. However, 16 generations of Naras have fought side by side with the Akamishis and the Yamanakas to form the Inashikatro trio. And therefore, they've been just as involved in ninja work as they have medicinal practices or politics. And while Shikamaru does have some impressive feats, they're not all that impressive. Shikamaru's won pretty much every single fight he's ever been in, except for his battle against Temari in the Chunin exam where he gave up because he ran out of chakra, his battle against Toyuya in the Sasuke retrieval arc where he was saved by Temari, his battle against Hidan and Kakuzu where he was saved by Asuma. But hey, at least he got Hidan back. See, here's the thing about Shikamaru. While his intelligence is obviously very impressive, it's not necessarily practical intelligence. See, even Naruto has acknowledged the fact that Kakashi is more intelligent than Shikamaru. And while I don't think Naruto is saying that Kakashi knows better algebra than Shikamaru, what I am saying is that Naruto has acknowledged the fact that Kakashi's battle IQ is probably substantially higher than Shikamaru's, as Kakashi can immediately adapt to things while Shikamaru needs a month clasping his hands together and all of the information on his opponents to build a plan on how to kill them. And while historically that plan has worked, and while we have seen Shikamaru think on his feet, like when he had to battle against Asuma after he had been brought back with Edo Tensei, there are a lot, and I mean a lot, of people out there who will throw Shikamaru into hilariously bad hypotheticals, being like,
but he has prep time.
Things like Shikamaru versus Itachi, but Shikamaru has all of the information and prep time. He's still gonna lose. Shikamaru has 2 separate light novels, and in his second light novel, we get a closer look on Shikamaru as the Hokage's aide, as the leader of the Shinobi Union. And while in this light novel, we see Shikamaru use shadow paralysis on all 5 Kage simultaneously, both Gaara and Naruto break out of it. But after Shikamaru leaves this 5 Kage summit and walks down the street a little bit, in anger, he shadow strangles a tree, which he actually can't even do. He can barely break the tree with his shadow, meaning that all 5 of the Kage were simply being polite. light. Shikamaru in Boruto has taken a massive step backwards in power, and while he does make a somewhat speculative plan against Kawaki, which actually kind of works, having Mitsuki bind him with his arm so he can't raise his hand to absorb his shadows with his Kara marking, Shikamaru nowadays really doesn't pose much of a threat to anybody, except as a politician. See, obviously Shikamaru's revenge against Hidan was incredible, but that's kind of where Shikamaru tops out. See, Hidan is the weakest member of the Akatsuki, and by a pretty significant margin. And on top of this, he's unable to use any ninjutsu or genjutsu, solely basing his entire skill set off of his Lord Jashin Blessing, Taijutsu, and Kenjutsu. And while Shikamaru made a really good plan on how to kill an unkillable person, which did require a very cheeky blood switch, outside of being Hokage's aide who helps Naruto in the more practical or political parts of being a Hokage, he's kind of useless. In fact, the entire plot of the second Shikamaru light novel was just Shikamaru trying to get everybody together so he could put Naruto in front of them. He's incredibly smart, but as a general or as an aide, with people like Itachi or Kakashi or Madara or Hashirama or even Naruto having massively higher battle IQs than him. So yes, I believe that Shikamaru's intelligence is massively overhyped. To keep the train rolling of entries that are probably going to garner me some hate, coming up at number 4, we have Kimimaro.
Oh, but Nick, but if he hadn't had his disease, he would have killed Gaara and Rock Lee simultaneously.
You're right. He would have, and that would have been really cool. And obviously, Shikatsumiyaku is awesome. Who doesn't love an ability that allows you to manifest more bones? It's essentially what Wolverine's kit was before he got adamantite. And obviously all of the bones that Kimimaro was able to generate were harder than steel. And he was able to pull out his spine and use it as a sword, or shoot out his little finger bullets, which were almost able to burrow their way through Gaara's perfect defense. And through the use of his level 2 curse mark and the way that he could use his bones to increase his defense, he was able to survive a sand burial. But just like with Shikamaru, that's about as far as Kimimaro was ever gonna go. Now, you could say that Kimimaro falls into the same camp as Itachi, that because he was crippled by his illness, we never truly got to know what his ceiling would look like. And without his illness, he would have been even stronger than the version of himself that we saw battle against Gaara and Rock Lee. But in the case of Kimimaro, I actually rally against that, because Kimimaro kind of had a cure. I mean, it wasn't a cure, but he had an ability that allowed him to overcome his illness, and that was the curse mark. And with the power of the activation of Kimimaro's curse mark, he could overcome the shortcomings of his body. However, he wasn't supposed to use his curse mark because it shortened his life. And therefore, I would say in his battle against Gaara and Rock Lee, we are actually seeing a full-powered Kimimaro. Though you could say, obviously, if he had a healthy body and a curse mark, he probably would have been a little stronger. And here's the thing, I have a lot of love for Kimimaro's character. He was one of the coolest people in OG Naruto. His battle against a drunk Rock Lee and Gaara is one of the best in Naruto. But a lot of people speculate that if Kimimaro had been healthy and been able to live a long life, he would have been one of the strongest characters in Naruto, which unfortunately just isn't true. See, the way that Shinkatsumiyaku works is really cool, and Kimimaro had a really cool character design. And maybe if Kimimaro had been taken over by Orochimaru as a perfect vessel, he could have achieved a level of power that currently I believe is unachievable for him. And technically, if he was healthy, that's probably what would have happened. But is that really Kimimaro achieving that power, or is it just Orochimaru using him as a conduit? Regardless, Kimimaro is kind of a one-trick pony. He has his Shikatsumiyaku, and that's kind of it. And obviously, Shikatsumiyaku is kind of like the earliest iteration of having Susanoo ribcage, in that physical attacks won't hit you because they'll hit your steel-like bones. But what happens when somebody comes around that can break steel-like bones? What happens when somebody comes around who doesn't need to break steel-like bones because they can use fire release or lightning release or water release? See, the reason that Rock Lee and Naruto were kind of bad matchups for Kimimaro is because at that time, they both relied very heavily on taijutsu. And when it comes to taijutsu, a man who you technically can't punch because you keep hitting his steel bones is a bad matchup. However, let's say hypothetically Kimimaro just happens to run across the path of Kisame or Itachi, people who can use ninjutsu at an incredibly high level. Bones don't stop you from being buried with earth release, or being drowned with water release, or shocked with lightning release, or lit on fire with flame release. Hell, the bones probably wouldn't even help him against a Rasa and Shuriken. And so unfortunately, much in a similar circumstance to Shikamaru, Kimimaru's coolest moment, when he almost killed Gaara and Rock Lee, is probably where he tops out. In fact, I think if Shino had been the one to battle against Kimimaro, he probably would have won. Now, obviously, yes, I know he was able to survive a Grand Sand burial, but he wouldn't be able to make it out of Grand Sand Mausoleum or probably any Grand Sand burial that Gaara can do in the modern day. As obviously Gaara at this point wasn't using the magnet release Kekkei Genkai he got from Rasa to increase the density of his sand. And therefore, after Gaara did some soul searching, his sand has now become substantially more powerful. So is Kimimaro a cool character? Yes, absolutely. One of my favorites, actually. Do I think with time and a healthy body he would have achieved much more? No, he would have been Suigetsu, a taijutsu kenjutsu specialist with a clan hidden jutsu. All right, let's move on to a slightly less controversial pick on this list, because coming up at number 3, we have Kakuzu. I only say slightly less controversial because I feel as though Kakuzu has less fanboys than the other two people I've previously mentioned. Kakuzu is an incredibly powerful ninja, probably top 5 in the Akatsuki. Obito, Nagato, Itachi, Kisame, Kakuzu? Yeah, I feel like 5. And because of that, he has a lot of hype garnered around him, which makes a lot of sense because his kit is kind of crazy. He's technically immortal, he can steal vital organs to continue his life, and he can steal the elemental releases of incredibly powerful ninja. And he can turn the hearts of those ninjas into little clones that he's able to separate from himself. And these clones are all able to use that elemental release at truly the highest level. And if one of these masks gets destroyed, not the end of the world, he can just kill somebody else and use their heart to make a new one. On top of this, through the power of his Earth Grudge Fear, his body is somewhat invulnerable, as he's able to reconnect detached limbs, extend them, grow them underground, and shoot them out from under people. He's even able to reattach Hidan's severed head. On top of all this, he is a man who battled against Hashirama without Earth Grudge Fear and survived. He is a very, very strong person, but not infallible and not the strongest in the Akatsuki. However, for the last couple of years, there's been a narrative going around that Kakuzu could possibly battle against the likes of Nagato and win. As if you don't think about it too hard, the two of them have a somewhat similar kit, being able to split into 6 and 5 clones respectively, and all of those clones having the ability to be remade and controlled and fixed. But what this rhetoric completely ignores is the fact that Kakuzu is entirely dependent on very tangible elemental release ninjutsu. Something which, if you're gonna talk the Kakuzu versus Nagato fight, that Nagato could simply just absorb. Whether that be through the Deva path, which has all of the powers of Nagato, or through the Asura path. I actually don't remember which path only had the ability to absorb. I would look it up, except I don't have internet right now. All my research coming from a phone. We wonder why Nick's doing an opinion piece. Not to mention, plugged in my main computer just doesn't work. So I'm using my backup computer. Yes, I have 2 computers because every time I move, this happens. But new boom arm. I mean, it's the same, it's a newer one of the one I had. The old one broke. Regardless, Kakuzu being put anywhere near the argument of being close to Nagato in power is insane. Obviously, yes, Kakuzu's taijutsu is very, very good. But the dev path went toe-to-toe with the likes of a version 2 six-tailed Naruto and came out completely fine. And also, obviously, all of the masks can technically be destroyed and can be replaced, and any of those masks can become Kakuzu's true heart should his true heart in his main body be destroyed. Destroying those masks isn't the hardest thing of all time. 1010 destroys 2 of them. Now, obviously, she's using the Basso-sen, which is one of the 6 past treasured tools, but how many people can say their Edo Tensei version was killed by 1010? But enough about these non-controversial characters. Let's get back to the ones that people yell at me about. Because coming up at number 2, we have Shisui. Now, I've gone on and on and on about how overhyped I believe Shisui to be. And that's because objectively, within the confines of canon, he has no feats. Now, obviously, Shisui is touted as one of the strongest Uchihas of all time. Or at least his ocular prowess is touted as the strongest. As Shisui is the wielder of Kodo Matsukame, said to be the strongest genjutsu ever, with the ability to rewrite anybody's entire personality without even making eye contact with them. It's no joke. However, there's one problem. We've never seen Shisui use Kodo Matsukame. The 2 times we've actually seen it, it was used by other people. We saw it once when Danzo tried to use it against Mifune, and that was lackluster to say the least, with a simple Byakugan foiling the entire plan and Mifune being instantly broken out of it with no repercussions. And the second time being significantly cooler, when Itachi placed the Kodo Matsukame eye in a crow that he placed in Naruto to react to Itachi's eyes, and reversed the control that Kabuto had over his body, essentially breaking Itachi out of Edo Tensei. Now, the reason that we never saw Shisui use Kodo Matsukame is because he was killed while he was very young by Danzo and Yoji Aburame. But because of this, this, really the only quantifiable feats we have for Shisui come from the light novel where he died, Itachi's second light novel, Book of Dark Night. And it's in this light novel that we see Itachi and Shisui battle against an Anbu captain who's selling the leaf secrets, Mukai Koinada, a man with one Byakugan. And while Itachi and Shisui do come out victorious in this battle against Mukai Koinada, it's not without a massive amount of work. In fact, it's not until Mukai has one of them by the throat that Shisui finally uses his MS Genjutsu ability. Not Kodo Matsukame, just a Genjutsu from his MS. He's able to overpower the Genjutsu immunity conferred by the Byakugan. Because Mukai has been placed under a Genjutsu, he cuts open his own stomach because of the seal placed on him by Danzo, which is kind of a weird win state, I'm not gonna lie. Who knows whether or not Mukai would have been able to break himself out of that Genjutsu. Feels more like a win for Danzo than for Itachi and Shisui. And that is legitimately Shisui's only quantifiable feat in canon. Yeah, we know he was the youngest ever to awake his MS, awaking at the age of 7, and he was known as Shisui the Body Flicker. But the Body Flicker technique isn't even as impressive as it sounds. Tons of people can use the Body Flicker. And I mean, yes, all of the people who can use the Body Flicker exist in the upper echelon of ninja power, but claiming that because he can use the Body Flicker that he's one of the most powerful ninjas of all time is a stretch. Now, the Body Flicker technique, for those of you who don't know, is when you move so fast, you leave after images. Naruto, Sasuke, Sakura, Kakashi, Minato, all of them can use it. Killer Bee, the fourth Raikage, all of them. Now, obviously, within the video games and some filler episodes in the anime, we see a couple of really cool feats from Shisui. Mostly they manifest in the form of him activating his Susanoo, which is incomplete because he doesn't have EMS. Though the Susanoo has a really cool spear and it can shoot green needles. And it's green, the only green Susanoo in existence. But none of this is canon. Now, obviously, Kishimoto designed his Susanoo, but does that canonize it? We don't really know. It's in a weird spot, especially because in the Naruto top 20 drawing of the top 20 characters and Kurama, Shisui is holding his Susanoo spear, which is just another layer of confusion on the is his Susanoo canon sandwich. But even if hypothetically Shisui's Susanoo is canon, it falls into the same capacity as Itachi's. It doesn't have legs or wings. It only goes where he goes with his legs, and therefore it's susceptible to all of the disadvantages that Itachi's has. It's susceptible to ground attacks, it can be sunk, it's not a perfect Susanoo. As well as the fact that his Susanoo doesn't really have anything in terms of like a signature item. Like, yeah, it can shoot like chakra senbon that are super dangerous, but that's kind of it. Susanoo-wise, it's probably the weakest we've ever seen. Therefore, when people argue that Shisui, if he'd survived, would have been the strongest Uchiha of all time, I can't help but disagree with. Obviously, Kodo Matsukame is the strongest Genjutsu out there, but Shisui could use it, what, 6 times, maybe 10 times in his entire life? And while there's theories that each of the Kodo Matsukames operate separately and that Danzo got the worst of the two, we don't know that for sure. Nobody ever tried to break Itachi out of the Kodo Matsukame. So sure, maybe you can be brainwashed, but also you might be able to be broken out of it as easy as any other Genjutsu. So is Shisui technically an absolute demon to fight against one-on-one? Sure, as long as he's not in the 10-year cooldown for Kodo Matsukame, which actually might be longer. The technical wording in the manga is decades. So sure, is Kodo Matsukame your average one-hit kill? Absolutely. It just is anywhere between a 10 and 30-year cooldown, and you can possibly be broken out of it so long as somebody is able to see your center chakra network. But hey, he beat a guy with one Byakugan, so good job, Shisui. He died from a bug bite. Millions of people die from bug bites a year. It's actually a problem, but not as much of a problem as the massive overhype of our #1 character on this list, Sakumo Hatake. That is not true at all. Malaria deaths are massively more important. It was just a good segue. Only one type of mosquito carries malaria. It's Aedes aegypti, and we know how to get rid of them. We just won't. At least America won't. Some countries have. Now that we're done talking about real world issues, let's go back to the fake world. Sakumo Hatake, known as the White Fang, the hero of the Second Great Shinobi World War, once said to be stronger than all 3 legendary Sannin combined. How could this man, said to be stronger than 3 of the strongest characters in Naruto, be overhyped? Because everything I just said outside of stabs himself in the stomach is everything we know about Sakumo Hatake, and that he killed Sasori's parents. That's it. That's the end of the article. That is all we know about the Great White Fang. And it's why he actually received a lot of votes in Naruto Top 99. People are curious about him. And while I have no doubt that Sakumo Hatake was an absolute demon, he had a run-on-site order in 2 separate villages, so bad that when people saw a white-haired child carrying a blade, they thought it was him, and split. That's a level of fear you can't garner without a couple of thousand bodies under your boots. And as far as I've speculated, he was the one spearheading the offensive campaign in the Second Great Shinobi World War into the Land of Wind, where he probably battled against the likes of Granny Chiyo and came out alive, which is saying something. But people tend to take this statement, stronger than 3 legendary Sannin combined, way too far. See, when people hear the term stronger than the 3 legendary Sannin combined, they take Tsunade and Jiraiya and Orochimaru at their peaks and put them together, and they're like,
This guy could have killed Kaguya.
because if you take Tsunade's healing prowess and Jiraiya's ability to destroy 4 out of the 6 paths of pain with no information and Orochimaru's genius, you have an unstoppable force. And if that's what we were talking about, you would be right. All 3 of the legendary Sannin working together would be a scary premise. In their peaks, that is. Because obviously the legendary Sannin have worked together. They've fought together in the Second Great Shinobi World War against Hanzo, where they lost. Does that mean that Hanzo the Salamander is Kaguya level? Does that mean that the 3-way gridlock that the legendary Sannin used in the Second Great Shinobi World War is as strong as the 3-way gridlock we saw in the 4th Great Shinobi World War? No! Speculate all you want about when Tsunade's peak was. I would personally say it's during the 4th Great Shinobi World War, but you could also say that her peak was wasted while she was drinking and gambling and having hemophobia. But Jiraiya and Orochimaru were undoubtedly not in their peak in the Second Great Shinobi World War. Orochimaru more than anyone. Orochimaru obviously would go down the path of evil human experiments that would make him stronger as he stole and figured out more jutsus and Kekigenkai, with the biggest thing that he mastered being Edo Tensei. But Jiraiya would also operate as the Shadow Hokage for Hiruzen for almost 2 decades before he hooked up with Naruto. Not only mastering all of his jutsus, but mastering his relationship with the Toads, his Sage Mode, which in the shortcuts to the Second Great Shinobi World War, we don't even see him using. These are the legendary Sannin that Sakumo Hatake is said to be stronger than. 20-year-olds, 19-year-olds. Because obviously Sakumo Hatake, you know, about 2 days into the 3rd Great Shinobi World War. So he never lived side by side with the legendary Sannin while they were in their peak. Sure, being said to be stronger than any iteration of the legendary Sannin combined is insane. But I would argue that Jiraiya in his prime, which was probably in his battle against Nagato, was probably stronger than the 3 legendary Sannin in the Second Great Shinobi World War. And therefore, I'd probably put Sakumo Hatake somewhere around either War Arc Kakashi or Prime Jiraiya, with the highest, and I mean the absolute highest I would put him being Hokage Kakashi. He wasn't some planet buster who was only killable by his own hands. He was an incredibly high-level Jonin, who probably could have defeated Granny Chiyo or Hanzo the Salamander in a fight, but he would still probably lose to the majority of the Hokage, Nagato, Itachi, Might Guy, and maybe Kisame. He was no joke, but trying to contemplate his power with the 3 peak legendary Sannin's powers combined makes him into this gargantuan monster that he most definitely wasn't. But then again, we don't know. He truly could have been stronger than the 3 legendary Sannin combined, and he could have only been killable by his own hands. The only other people to garner as much fear as him on the battlefields were Fugaku and Minato, both of which were either Hokage candidates or a Hokage. So is the hype warranted? I don't think so, but is there a lot of it? Absolutely. But what do you guys think? Who do you think is the most overhyped character in Naruto? Tell me in the comments below, and while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell.